Have you ever been humiliated in a place where you absolutely belonged? You paid for the premium ticket. You had all the right documents. You followed every rule, but the moment you walked through that door, they looked you up and down and said, "Sorry, this isn't your place." It wasn't just a sentence, it was an invisible slap to your dignity, a reminder that, to them, you're just an outsider no matter how much you paid. You sit down, swallow the rage, and ask yourself, what am I worth in their eyes? But what if I told you, one day, the person they looked down on didn't just reclaim her seat, she took the entire stage. This is the story of Amara Lewis, a black woman, 44 years old, calm like the sky before a storm. She bought a first-class ticket on a flight from Chicago to New York, but as she stepped inside, the lead flight attendant blocked her with a cold smile. "Perhaps you're mistaken. This isn't your seat." Amara didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She quietly walked to economy. Someone smirked. Someone shook their head in pity. They thought she had accepted defeat. They didn't know. She was negotiating to buy the airline itself. 30 minutes later, the plane landed. And within another 30 minutes, the entire crew from that flight lost their jobs in silence. No shouting, no long explanations. Just one black woman who spoke softly and decided their fate. This is a story about silence, but the kind of silence that makes the whole world tremble. Before we begin, if you've ever been disrespected or humiliated like this, share your story in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Now, let's go back to that moment Amara Lewis stepped onto that fateful flight. Amara Lewis climbed the jet bridge stairs with slow, deliberate steps, as if each footfall was a statement. 44 years old, black. She didn't need flashy designer labels to announce her status. A pair of tailored black trousers, an ivory blouse, and sharp-pointed heels were enough. She dressed like herself, minimalist, but impossible to overlook, with her first-class ticket firmly in hand. Amara entered the cabin not as someone who had merely paid for the seat, but as someone who deserved to be there. The cabin smelled of polished wood and expensive perfume. Chestnut leather seats lined up in perfect order, gleaming as if they'd never been touched. Soft golden lighting wrapped the space in a cozy illusion, but beneath it were the watchful eyes of those inside. A suited man flicked a glance at her, then back to his documents. A blonde woman with a silk scarf at her neck watched Amara from the corner of her eye, lips pursed in quiet judgment. The purser, standing a few steps away, stretched his smile to textbook perfection, polite, trained, but void of warmth. Amara had seen those looks before, the silent question in them. What is she doing here? It was as if the entire space had been designed to exclude people like her, those who didn't fit the image of luxury clientele. In this cabin, silence wasn't peace. It was a quiet conversation who belongs and who doesn't. She paused and held out her ticket. Her face betrayed nothing, but inside, her thoughts layered one over another. Go ahead. Stare. I know exactly how I look to them, a black woman without a visible brand screaming her worth. But I am here, and I don't need their permission to exist. The ticket in her hand was undeniable proof that she belonged. But in spaces like this, value often wasn't measured by paper passes, it was dictated by unspoken prejudice. Prejudice that could turn a first-class seat into private territory, guarded by those who believed they had the right to decide who could sit there. Amara took a deep breath. She had walked into thousands of rooms like this, boardrooms, hotels, conferences where luxury came with an unspoken message. This is not your space. But Amara never needed validation to be present. She didn't walk in to be accepted. She walked in to accomplish a purpose. And tonight, that purpose was much bigger than a seat. They thought it was just a seat. They didn't know. It was a trap she had carefully set. She stopped when the purser approached. A man in his 40s, hair slicked back, uniform crisp without a wrinkle. He smiled, one of those customer service smiles trained to perfection, the lips curved just so, the eyes slightly narrowed to feign welcome. But Amara knew that smile. It wasn't meant for her. "Perhaps you're mistaken," he said, voice soft enough to sound caring. "This isn't your seat." Amara met his gaze in silence. Inside, a spark of irony flickered. A sweet voice, sharp insult, not a bad opening act. She still said nothing. She simply held out her ticket. Her long, steady fingers gripped it like irrefutable evidence. He glanced down, then back up. The smile didn't fade, but it tightened. "Yes, but this seat is already taken. I'll arrange for you to sit in economy instead. Please follow me." Polite words, but Amara heard the real meaning. "You don't belong here. Know your place." She turned her head. The surrounding eyes darted away, but not fast enough to hide their glee. The man with the briefcase kept his eyes on his papers, but the corner of his mouth curled upward. The scarfed woman pretended to fix her hair, but her gaze stayed locked on Amara. Amara smiled a quiet, unnervingly calm smile. "They really think I'll argue, that I'll rage. How unimaginative." She followed the purser down the narrow aisle, each step stretching into infinity. The click of her heels against the floor merged with the growing hum of the main cabin. Here, there was no polished wood or luxurious perfume, just the smell of reheated meals and the hum of ordinary chatter. He stopped near the back, bent slightly, and gestured. "Your seat, ma'am." That same hollow smile. Amara said nothing. She sat, tucked her bag under the seat, and folded her hands neatly. "Interesting," she thought. "They took a seat and thought they won. If only they knew I'm sitting here as more than a passenger, they might be the ones losing sleep tonight." She leaned back, eyes on the plane's ceiling. The cramped, noisy cabin felt like a perfect stage. And the people who smirked upstairs, they didn't yet realize they'd been cast as the main characters in her play. This game had only just begun, and Amara had never lost on her own field. She adjusted herself in the narrow seat, her bag resting at her feet, her posture composed and unyielding. The engines roared, the plane taxied forward. Around her, passengers glanced curious, pitying, some even amused. But Amara didn't waste a single thought on them. She stayed silent, not the silence of defeat, the silence of calculation. "Go on, play your little scene. When the curtain falls, I'll be the one applauding." In her mind, the details of this flight aligned like chess pieces. The purser's forced smile, his condescending tone, the sidelong looks from first class, the scarfed woman's pursed lips. Amara committed it all to memory, every seemingly insignificant gesture. To others, they were scraps. To her, they were weapons. She closed her eyes and breathed evenly. The din of economy chatters, crying children, clattering trays faded into a stillness inside her. From a young age, she had learned this truth sometimes. Silence is the strongest fortress. A younger flight attendant passed by, glanced quickly at her, then looked away. Amara chuckled inwardly. "They probably think I'm frozen in humiliation. Too bad for them, I've lived through far worse than this." She opened her eyes and stared at the empty space ahead. This game had started the moment she stepped on the plane. But the ones who thought they'd won didn't know they were already playing by her rules. Amara wasn't just any passenger. She was someone who could change the fate of this airline with a single decision. And her silence. It was the pause before the thunder. She closed her eyes again, breathing slow, letting them believe she had accepted her place. Let them continue their little performance, thinking they still controlled the scene. But Amara Lewis had never entered a room without claiming the final move. This flight would be no exception. And soon, they would learn. Silence can be the heaviest blow. Amara opened her eyes when she felt a stare from across the aisle. A middle-aged white man, wearing a pale blue shirt and khakis, was looking at her with a puzzled expression. It wasn't the harmless curiosity of someone observing a fellow traveler. It was the kind of look that cut through, as if she were an object out of place, something both misplaced and irritating. That look was so familiar Amara didn't need to interpret it. It had followed her through hotel lobbies, fine dining restaurants, and the boardrooms she had walked into. It was the look that always preceded the unspoken questions. What are you doing here? Who let you in? And sometimes, the questions weren't even necessary because, in their minds, the answer was already clear. You don't belong here. Amara tilted her head and offered a faint, polite smile, as if returning his gaze with a casual greeting. But inside, she heard the same old song beginning again, that unwelcome tune that somehow played on repeat throughout her life. She remembered the time she was denied a room at a luxury hotel, even though she'd booked in advance. The front desk clerk had said, "Sorry, we can't find your name in the system," while still holding her printed reservation in his hand. She remembered the dinner at a fine restaurant where she was ignored for over 30 minutes while every table around her received attentive service. She remembered the meetings where people assumed she was someone's assistant, not the executive running the room, all because of the color of her skin, which they'd already assigned to a lesser role. An old song, Amara thought, and they still think they're the ones composing it. But this time, she wasn't a powerless audience member. The man across from her quickly broke eye contact before her gaze could fully meet his. But it didn't erase the sting, that familiar burn of being scrutinized, reduced, defined by a single glance. Amara inhaled deeply. She didn't need to react. She had learned how to turn those looks into fuel. The plane jolted slightly as it hit a thicker pocket of air, but Amara remained still. In a world where glances could cut like blades, she had built herself armor that no condescending smirk or saccharine, knife-sharp word could pierce. She shifted slightly, tightening her seatbelt, her lips curling into a faint smile. They can look at me as if I don't exist. But soon, they'll remember me in a way they'll never forget. Her eyes no longer reflected defensiveness. They glimmered, as if she'd just remembered something important. This game was about to get new rules, and Amara was the only one who knew them. A young flight attendant emerged from first class, carrying a tray of champagne. Her smile was bright, but only for the white passengers up front. Amara watched her stop at a row on the left, bow slightly, and offer a glass to an older couple. Her voice was soft, almost overly sweet. "Sorry for the delay. I hope this is to your satisfaction." The couple nodded, but the man frowned, placing his glass back on the tray. "It's not cold enough," he said. Not loudly, but loud enough for the whole row to hear. The words slid out like a small, precise blade. No one reacted, but everyone heard. The attendant lowered her head. "I apologize. I'll bring you a colder one right away." Then she walked away, still without so much as glancing at Amara, who had been sitting there for more than 10 minutes without being asked a single question or offered a single drink. Amara leaned back, folding her arms. "Interesting. Their champagne not being cold is an emergency. My presence not even worth acknowledging." She chuckled softly, a smile only she understood. "Too bad for them. I didn't stumble into this world by accident. I'm buying it." Her eyes swept across the economy cabin men in wrinkled suits, women clutching their bags tightly, a few children sleeping on their mothers' shoulders, passengers no one looked at twice. But Amara knew better. Every space, even this cramped airplane cabin, had rules, and the one who controlled the rules had the power. The flight attendant returned, nervously holding a new glass of champagne. The older man nodded, smirking slightly, as if he'd just won some invisible battle. Amara shook her head. A colder drink. And he thinks he's established his status. Meanwhile, I'm about to establish mine by making sure this entire crew remembers my name. The plane felt warmer, not because of the air system, but because of the crisscrossing gazes, some furtive, some overt, aimed at Amara. There was something about her that made them want to look away, yet unable to stop watching. She drew a deep breath, steadying herself. They could ignore her. They could treat her like some misplaced object in a sea of seats. But with one command, one single word, every person on this plane would shift into her orbit. Amara sat still, but inside, she was scripting a play they didn't even know they'd been cast in. And when the curtain fell, she would be the only one standing to applause. A faint vibration in her handbag made Amara open her eyes. Not her personal phone, that one was on silent. This was her secure line, a private device known only to a select few in her world. She slipped it out, concealing it beneath her blouse with the kind of reflex that comes from habit. A message appeared. There's a mole in the airline. Don't react. Observe. Amara pressed her lips together, as if tasting a rare wine. She leaned back, her gaze fixed ahead, but inside, the pieces began falling into place. So this isn't just arrogance or casual racism, she thought. This is a game. She recalled the conversations from a few days ago, calls about the deal to acquire this airline. Everyone at the table had seemed cooperative, but Amara knew big numbers always bring out hidden hands eager to sabotage. And now, someone had chosen the simplest way to attack her, humiliating her on the flight of the very airline she was about to own. But Amara didn't feel anger. Anger was what they wanted. They wanted her to lose her cool, to make a scene, to become gossip fodder. Instead, Amara smiled. A small, almost imperceptible smile, but inside it was a declaration. Fine. Play your little game. When it's over, I'll be the one clapping. She closed the phone and slipped it back into her bag. Her hands folded neatly in her lap. The picture of a compliant passenger. But in her mind, she had already switched modes from observer to predator. Every side-eye, every cutting remark since the beginning of this flight was now just background noise for the play Amara was directing. She wouldn't react. Not yet. Sometimes. The best revenge is letting your enemy walk themselves right into the trap they don't know exists. Her gaze flicked toward the row ahead, where the purser had just disappeared back into first class. That man thought he'd demoted her to her proper place. Amara's lips curled. You just signed your name to a script I wrote, and trust me, you won't like the ending. The flight buzzed on like any other, but for Amara, the space had transformed. This wasn't a drab economy cabin anymore. It was a mobile investigation room, where she gathered evidence, and everyone on this plane, knowingly or not, was leaving a trail. She closed her eyes, letting her body go limp as if resting. But only she knew the truth. The game had just leveled up. And when it ended, no one would ever dare question Amara's place again. Amara shifted her posture, folding her arms across her chest and leaning back as if she'd finally found a comfortable position. In truth, she didn't need comfort. She needed perspective. And right now, the entire cabin was her stage, and the crew were merely actors performing for her. She watched the purser move, chin slightly lifted, shoulders squared, carrying himself with the kind of performative authority that made him look less like someone serving customers and more like a self-appointed gatekeeper. A gatekeeper to a territory with invisible borders. First class, where he decided who belonged. He spoke to his colleagues in a half-whisper, half-command voice, each word dripping with the kind of arrogance that only comes from people too accustomed to control. Interesting, Amara thought. They think they're humiliating me. They don't realize they're performing exactly the script I wanted. Her gaze shifted to the young flight attendant who had served the champagne earlier. The woman had practically bowed to the white passengers. bending so low she nearly touched the floor when saying, "Sorry for the inconvenience." But when she passed Amara, she didn't even bother with a glance, let alone a word. Amara filed that away not just in her memory, but with the instinct of someone who'd learned to collect evidence even when she didn't need it. The man in the pale blue shirt was still stealing glances at her. His eyes no longer carried just judgment, now there was confusion, tinged with curiosity. Perhaps he was wondering why she was still sitting there, so composed, so unbothered. Amara's lips curved slightly. "You'll find out soon enough, and when you do, I hope you remember this moment when you thought I was just another passenger." The purser's voice came over the intercom, announcing the remaining flight time. Calm, professional, but to Amara, it sounded like the voice of a puppet who didn't realize someone else was pulling the strings. She half closed her eyes not to sleep, but to listen more intently. Every fragment of conversation, every footstep, every subtle shift in the cabin's rhythm, it was all data. And Amara collected data the way an artist collects materials for their final masterpiece. This was no longer about humiliation. It had become a performance. And the best thing about performances, the actors rarely know who's sitting in the front row. Amara straightened her back. If they wanted to perform, she would sit here, in her economy seat, and watch until the curtain fell. But there was one thing they didn't know: she was never just an audience member. The purser returned to economy, standing close to Amara's row. He spoke to a colleague, but his voice was deliberately loud enough for the right people to hear. "Everyone wants to act like they're upscale," he said with a little shrug, his eyes skimming past Amara. "But not everyone qualifies." The words dropped into the air like a drop of ink into clear water, spreading fast and staining every glance around her. A few passengers chuckled. Not loudly, not crudely, but enough to cut deep. The kind of chuckles that said, "We all know the truth, she doesn't belong here." Amara kept her gaze steady, not looking up. Inside, she smirked. How cute. Even their contempt comes gift-wrapped, like slapping me in the face but tying a bow on it first. She could feel how this moment wasn't just meant for her. It was staged, displayed a warning for anyone else watching, a lesson in knowing your place, a cheap little power play. 2 rows ahead, a man turned his head slightly and smiled in agreement. The silk scarf woman leaned toward her companion and whispered something that made them both laugh. Amara couldn't make out the words, but she didn't need to. The message was clear. She doesn't belong here. She crossed her arms tighter and leaned back, letting them savor their little moment of triumph. "Go ahead. Enjoy it. This will be the last time you laugh without knowing why you're trembling." Her hand slipped into her handbag, fingers brushing against her secure phone. Not to send a message, just to remind herself that this game had more layers than they could imagine. And when the time came, a single touch could change the entire space. She raised her head and locked eyes with the purser. No words, no frown, just a calm, unblinking stare that lasted long enough to make him uncomfortable, deep enough to make him look away first. To the others, it may have looked like Amara swallowed her pride, but in reality, she was swallowing this moment slowly to weaponize it later. Every performance needs a climax, and Amara knew she was getting close. She closed her eyes, breathing evenly. On the outside, they could think she was a quiet loser, but inside, she was counting every beat, every word, every player preparing for a retaliation they would never forget. The play had begun. But Amara had never been the kind of woman who sat quietly in the audience. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Their condescending words were already enough to expose them. Amara reached into her bag and pulled out a small, sleek, black device. She pressed a button. A barely audible click confirmed it had begun recording. Every word, every chuckle, every whisper on this flight, they now belonged to her. Perfect. Keep talking. Every word is another noose you're tightening around your own neck. She placed the device discreetly on her lap, folding her hands over it like nothing was happening. Inside, she could feel her heartbeat slowing, not from fear, but from the satisfaction of holding a kind of power they hadn't yet realized existed. The purser continued strutting down the aisle, stopping at Rose to make small talk. He looked relaxed, but Amara knew it was a facade. People who are used to control always believe they're untouchable until the walls collapse, and they don't even know where the cracks began. She quietly observed every glance, every gesture, every word. The silk scarf woman occasionally peeked back at her, whispering to her companion. A younger man smirked like he'd just witnessed a comedy. They thought Amara didn't hear them, but in this moment, every word they uttered was evidence. The plane rumbled softly, engines humming, but for Amara, the cabin felt smaller, tighter. Just her and these people, exposing themselves one word at a time. She didn't have to do much, just sit there, calm, and let them keep performing. And she would collect it all, every piece, every word, every smug smile. The beauty of this game, people talk the most when they think you're powerless. And the more powerless they think you are, the more confident they become in revealing their cruelty. Amara had seen it her whole life in boardrooms, on flights, in spaces where power was wielded like a club to redraw the boundaries. But this time, that club was about to swing back. She glanced toward first class, where the most self-assured players still sat in their warm bath of privilege. They had no idea that this little play already had a special audience, one who never left her seat before the curtain came down. Amara tilted her head slightly, as if whispering to herself, "Keep going. Soon you'll understand that every word you spoke today was your own indictment." The plane was still in the sky, but Amara knew by the time they landed, nothing would be in the same place. And not everyone would be flying again. The engines roared with a sudden violence, followed by a jolt so sharp that the plastic cup on Amara's tray tipped over, water splashing across her wrist. The plane shuddered like a massive beast struck by a whip, thrashing in pain. A few passengers screamed, their voices overlapping in a shrill, chaotic chorus. A child burst into tears, the broken sobs ratcheting up the tension in the cabin. A young flight attendant darted down the aisle, her professional smile gone, replaced by a pale, strained mask of control. Amara noticed the tremor in her hand as she gripped a seat back for balance. The air thickened, heavy enough to slice. Knuckles whitened on armrests. Whispered prayers rose like steam. The purser appeared in the aisle, voice over the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. This is just light turbulence." But the way he said it fast, slightly breathless, only deepened the unease. Amara stayed still. She didn't clutch the armrests. She didn't bow her head to pray. Her eyes stared straight ahead, silently cataloging everything the crooked tie of the man two rows up as he fumbled to adjust it. The silk scarf woman's trembling fingers brushing her neck. The clumsy attempts of the crew to paste on calming smiles that no longer held. How ironic, Amara thought. One little shake, and their whole facade crumbles. The confident, the arrogant, reduced to bodies that tremble when reminded they control nothing. She tilted slightly, calmly wiping the water from her wrist with a napkin, each movement slow and deliberate. Oddly alien against the frantic energy around her. She knew people were watching, wondering why she wasn't panicking. But Amara had lived through far greater turbulence, not in the skies, but in rooms where power was wielded like a blade. The PA crackled again. This time the captain, "Please fasten your seatbelts. We're passing through some rough air for the next few minutes." His voice was steadier than the purser's, but Amara caught the thin thread of strain beneath the professionalism. Her breathing stayed even. No reason to panic, at least not for her. For Amara, chaos was never a threat, it was an opportunity. In chaos, People shed their masks, and she was watching those masks crack in real time. A perfect soundtrack for the play she was still directing. Another violent jolt sent a storage bin flying open, luggage crashing down against an armrest with a sharp bang. A man yelped as his laptop slid to the floor. A woman clung to her husband's arm, eyes shut, lips moving in a prayer she couldn't finish. The crew rushed through the narrow aisle, trying to mask their panic with service smiles, but none of them stuck. A flight attendant struggled with the jammed latch on an overhead bin, nearly stumbling. The purser joined her, but instead of seamless teamwork, they bumped awkwardly into each other like two actors who'd forgotten their lines on stage. Amara watched it all like a researcher observing specimens. Her eyes recorded everything, the purser's trembling hands as he tightened a passenger's seatbelt, the way his commands were met with delayed, scattered responses. The ones who strutted in calm skies were reduced to fumbling amateurs under a wrinkled sky. Oh, this crew can't even keep their footing, Amara thought, lips curving faintly. Yet they believe they can measure my worth. The child's crying persisted. The PA chimed in again. Please remain calm. We'll be through this patch shortly. But even the captain's carefully modulated voice carried a sharp edge. Fear has a way of leaking through the cracks. The silk scarf woman fumbled for the call button, only to be ignored as a young attendant hurried past, her eyes locked on the floor, focused more on escape than service. The passengers who had been the center of the universe in first class were now invisible, their demands drowned out by survival instinct. Amara sank deeper into her seat, arms folded. This chaos didn't unsettle her. It thrilled her. It was a test, and she had always excelled at tests like these. A cramped cabin, the mighty made small, the gatekeepers of value unable to control themselves. It was almost poetic. She closed her eyes, letting the scene wash over her, the prayers, the crying, the clatter of unsteady shoes on a shaking floor, and, amid it all, she recognized a truth so obvious it hummed in her bones when power hits the ground. It makes the loudest sound of all. Amara opened her eyes, inhaling deeply. This flight was offering her something more than a seat. It was offering her leverage. And once the plane stabilized, she would be the first to claim it. As the turbulence eased, Amara reached into her bag and pulled out a device so discreet no one paid it any mind, a compact satellite phone, separate from the noise of the outside world. Not for calling family, not for casual chatter. This was a tool for calls that could shift the direction of a company, sometimes an entire industry. She dialed, 2 rings. A low, gravelly voice answered. Lewis, no greeting. When I land, Amara said slowly, enunciating each word, we need a serious conversation, and remember Flight 302. A short silence, just a sigh deep, heavy enough for Amara to know the man understood the weight of her words. Understood, he replied, not a question, not a hesitation. The call ended. Amara slid the phone back into her bag and leaned into her seat. To the casual observer, it might have looked like she'd simply arranged for a car pickup, but she knew the real storm hadn't been in the clouds. She closed her eyes lightly and waited. Minutes later, the purser appeared in economy. His face stiffened like a cracked mask. Gone was the gatekeeper of first class. His voice was small, urgent. Ms. Lewis, we deeply apologize for the earlier inconvenience. Please let me know whatever you need. Anything for the passenger in seat 2C. Heads turned. Same uniform, same man, but his tone had been rewritten. Amara looked him dead in the eye, taking her time. She saw the pale tension there, the heaviness of someone acting on orders far above his pay grade. That was quick, she thought, lips twitching. One call, and the same people who thought they stood above me are now waiting for my orders. She didn't answer right away. Sometimes, the purest form of power was letting someone stew in silence, guessing what came next. Amara slowly adjusted her seatbelt, as if this was just another flight. The purser remained there, awkward, unsure, and Amara, without saying a single word, had reclaimed all the ground they thought they'd taken. She closed her eyes again. The play had entered its next act. And this time, she was the director. After the call, Amara said nothing. She simply sat there back straight, hands folded neatly on her lap, eyes fixed on the empty space ahead as if nothing of consequence had just happened. But it was that very silence, not shouting, not demands, that shifted the air inside the plane. The purser avoided her gaze, busying himself with meaningless tasks, straightening blankets, checking overhead bins, issuing quiet instructions to junior attendants. But Amara saw through every clumsy movement, every forced gesture of calm masking the tension that made his whole body stiff. She still didn't speak. She made no request, and that, more than anything else, unsettled them. Interesting, Amara thought. Someone could scream in their faces and it wouldn't break them. But silence makes them tremble. A young flight attendant passed by, seemingly intending to greet her, but the moment she caught Amara's gaze, she veered away like she'd hit an invisible wall. Passengers in economy were beginning to watch her too, not for her skin color or her downgraded seat, but for something else entirely, the presence of someone whose calm couldn't be shaken, even in the aftermath of chaos. Amara tilted her head slightly, glanced at her watch. She wasn't in a rush. Silence, too, was a language, and sometimes it spoke louder than words. Let them wait, she told herself. Let them sit in the dark, guessing what's coming. A man across the aisle studied her openly now. His eyes no longer carried disdain or doubt, but unmasked curiosity. Everyone seemed to sense there was something different about this woman, something that made them question their first assumptions. The crew, once so quick to decide who belonged where, no longer dared to engage her. Their awkwardness infected the cabin. And Amara. She let the silence spread, like an invisible fog suffocating those who had once delighted in seeing her pushed out of first class. She folded her arms, closed her eyes as if resting. But in truth, this was the stillness before the storm, a stillness she created, controlled, and relished. And when this plane touched the ground, she knew none of them would hold their positions as before. Amara's silence made the crew squirm, and as if by instinct, they began to make amends. The same young attendant who had earlier ignored her gaze now returned with a tray of juice and a warm towel. Her smile was stiff, awkward, as she placed the drink on Amara's tray. "Ma'am, this is a special service. Please let us know if you need anything else." Moments later, another attendant arrived. "We'd be happy to upgrade you to first class right now if you'd like." His voice wavered, stripped of the arrogance it once carried. Amara didn't answer. She simply tilted her head, glanced at them as though considering, then turned away. No acceptance, no refusal. If silence had a price, Amara thought, right now I'm selling it for millions, and they still don't know they've bought it. Not long after, the purser himself appeared. No longer the gatekeeper of the elite cabin, he now resembled a man walking a tightrope, one gust away from falling. He bent slightly, lowered his voice. "Is Lewis? We sincerely apologize. Please allow us the chance to make this right." Amara took a slow sip of water. Calm, deliberate. She didn't need to shout or recount their wrongs. Her silence swallowed his apology, leaving it to drift in the void, unacknowledged. They grew more frantic. A gourmet meal from first class was set in front of her. Another attendant brought a plush blanket and pillow, scrambling to please the very woman they had dismissed an hour ago. But it was already too late. Amara's silence was no longer a wall. It had become a mirror, reflecting back their unease and guilt. With every desperate attempt to appease her, the power balance tilted further in her favor, not because she demanded it, but because they now understood their footing was gone. She reclined slightly, closed her eyes. Every word, every obsequious act only underscored one truth she had already won without uttering a single word. And she knew this was only the opening move. Amara opened her eyes, staring at the glass of juice as though considering some trivial detail. But in her mind, everything had already been set in motion. This was no longer the time for observation. It was time to tighten the noose. She pulled out her secure phone, the one the crew would never know existed. Her long fingers moved with precision. No hesitation. In a few keystrokes, the full audio file, every snide comment, every mocking laugh was sent directly to her corporation's security team. No explanations, no calls, just one data file. And they would know exactly what to do with it. The trap is closed, she thought, leaning back, breathing evenly. This wasn't retaliation. It was a plan set in motion the moment she stepped on this plane. She let them perform, let them reveal themselves, let every word become evidence. And now, that evidence would do far more than embarrass them. It would change the fate of everyone involved. Amara folded the phone shut, slipped it back into her bag. Outside, the purser still paced nervously, a caged animal sensing danger but unable to locate it, exactly as she wanted to let them taste the fear of losing control. They thought they were playing power games, she mused. But real power never needs to shout. Real power is when you can change everything with one touch. A young boy in the next seat glimpsed the device, his curious eyes lingering. Amara offered a faint smile enough to make him turn away, but leaving him with a quiet understanding this was no ordinary woman they had humiliated. Above, the engines hummed steadily, a score for the plan Amara had just completed. She wouldn't announce it. She didn't need to. When this plane's doors opened, those who thought they held the strings would realize they were merely pawns in a game she'd already won. She crossed her arms, closed her eyes, relaxing her body. Not to sleep, but to savor the moment before the real storm began. Because when that cabin door opened, every false smile would fall away. And Amara would be the one to decide who stayed aboard. The plane's wheels hit the runway with a soft jolt, engines winding down to silence, leaving only the familiar voice over the intercom. "Welcome to your destination." But no one clapped. There were no soft cheers of relief, only a dense, heavy stillness as if everyone in that cabin had just survived a storm they weren't sure had truly ended. Amara stood, smoothing her coat, walking out with the composure of someone who hadn't been rattled physically or mentally. The crew instinctively stepped back, their eyes refusing to meet hers for more than a second. They no longer saw a black passenger they'd shunted out of first class. They were staring at something else, a presence they couldn't name, but could feel. An airport staffer hurried toward her, about to offer help. Amara said only, "VIP room. Get the entire crew of Flight 302 there, and every executive responsible for this flight. Urgent." The word urgent wasn't a request, it was an order. The employee froze for half a second, then fumbled for their phone and sprinted off. Amara kept walking. Every step carried her deeper into a battle she already knew she'd won. No shouting, no theatrics. She walked like someone who owned the space because, in some way, she did. The VIP room sat at the end of the hallway, far from the regular lounges. Dark wooden walls, soft amber lighting a facade of calm. But Amara knew it would shatter within minutes. She took the large leather chair at the center, crossing her legs, her hands resting lightly on the armrests. No emotion, no impatience, no wasted movements. One by one, they filed in the purser, the flight attendants, two senior executives wearing strained, performative smiles. They stood in a line, like students waiting for their names to be called. No one spoke. No one dared to sit until Amara allowed it. She looked at them, long enough for each to feel completely exposed. No greetings, no opening remarks. Her silence was the greeting heavier than any words could be. In that moment, they all understood they weren't here to defend themselves. They were here for judgment. And Amara, with nothing more than her presence and gaze, made them understand that without saying a word, no one dared break the silence. The purser stood closest to the door, spine stiff but hands behind his back clenched white. One of the executives attempted a polite smile to cut the tension, but it crumbled the moment Amara's eyes met his. The leather chairs around the table remained empty, no one brave enough to sit without her signal. They sat there quietly, clinging to the idea that this was just a complaint resolution. A few harsh words, a perfunctory apology, maybe some compensation, the usual script. Safe, predictable. Amara's gaze drifted across each face, pausing on the purser a beat longer. He quickly looked away, then straightened like a child caught doing something wrong. Look at them, she thought, the self-styled gatekeepers, now standing like schoolchildren waiting to be called out. Don't worry, I'm not here to scold, I'm here to clear the board. She let the silence stretch. It clamped around them like a vice, squeezing the last of their defenses. The longer they didn't hear her voice, the more they feared what was coming. One executive cleared his throat, forcing out, "Ms. Lewis, we deeply regret the unfortunate experience you had on this flight. Please allow me to explain." "No need," Amara cut him off. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was a blade. The man froze, mouth half open, silenced. Amara shifted slightly, folding her arms, leaning back in her chair, the posture of someone who had nothing to prove, nothing to ask permission for. A young attendant at the end of the line swallowed hard. Her eyes brushed Amara's for a second before darting away, as though that brief contact had stripped her bare. Amara saw everything. They didn't realize she wasn't just looking, she was reading them. Every gesture, every breath, every sideways glance between them. This wasn't a meeting to hear explanations. This was a stage for truth, and she, not anyone else in the room, held the script. She gave a small nod, as if confirming a thought she'd already formed. The match had begun the moment the VIP room door closed, and only Amara knew the next move. The door creaked open, and Amara entered. No greeting, no unnecessary gestures. Her heels clicked in steady rhythm against the wooden floor, echoing in the suffocating quiet where even the shallow, quickened breaths of those waiting could be heard. All eyes turned to her, but no one dared hold her gaze for long. She didn't need an introduction. They all knew exactly who she was and, more importantly, why she was here. Amara walked straight to the head of the table. Back straight, chin slightly raised. She sat, a simple movement that made the room shiver. As if on cue, the line of crew and executives awkwardly pulled out chairs, sitting hesitantly, each trying not to make a sound. The air turned heavy, not from the temperature, but from the sheer weight of Amara's silence. She didn't speak, just swept her eyes across them. The purser kept his head down, unable to meet her gaze. One executive clasped his hands tight over his chest, perhaps to hide a pounding heart. A young attendant pretended at composure, though her trembling hands on her lap betrayed her. Amara drew in a slow breath, soft, but enough to pull every eye back to her. In this silence, even the smallest movement felt monumental. She didn't need to shout or pound the table. Real power didn't need display. It lived in her ability to make an entire room hold its breath with a single look. Good, Amara thought. Feel it. This isn't a complaint session. This is a trial, and I'm here to deliver the verdict. An executive tried to speak, desperate to shatter the quiet Ms. Lewis. We. Amara raised her hand slightly. Stop. No words, but it worked. He shut his mouth instantly, like a schoolboy caught whispering. For a moment, she studied them the way a collector studies artifacts at an auction, not to choose, but to assess value. Faces that once wore smugness now looked small, waiting for what none of them wanted to hear. She crossed her arms, leaned forward slightly, fixing her eyes on the purser. Her voice low, deliberate. Begin. I want to hear each of you explain. One sentence, enough to turn the silence into a cage that locked them all inside. Amara owned the room now, and as she leaned back once more, folding her arms, everyone understood. The game they thought they controlled had just been taken from them. Amara placed the phone on the table. A small, ordinary object, but one that held a storm waiting to break. The room sank into silence. No coughing, no shuffling of chairs. Only the soft hum of the air conditioning and the sharp, shallow breathing of people pretending to stay calm. Amara said nothing. Arms folded, leaning back in her chair, her eyes swept across the room. Slowly, long enough for each look to cut into the one being seen. The purser stared at the table, as if the wood grain could offer an escape. The senior executive to Amara's left pressed his lips into a thin line. His fingers interlaced so tightly his knuckles turned white. The rest didn't look much better, all of them carrying the posture of people waiting for a verdict they knew they couldn't change. She let them sit there in 15 seconds of absolute silence. 15 seconds, long enough for every thought in the room to pound like a drum. And in those 15 seconds, she didn't need to speak for them to know every ounce of power now belonged to her. This is my favorite moment, she thought. The moment when those who once underestimated me finally realize the game has changed and no one even had to say it out loud. A young flight attendant fidgeted, sliding her foot across the floor. The sound was barely audible. Yet, in that stretched silence, it cracked like a gunshot. Amara glanced at her. One look. The girl froze, hands flat on her lap, eyes cast to the floor. Amara tilted her head, a thin smile forming. Interesting. These people could raise their voices at 30,000 feet, but here, one look from me, and they fold like schoolchildren who forgot their homework. She reached toward the phone, lightly tapping the screen. A soft blue glow lit up. No explanation, no preamble. They all knew what was inside evidence. But Amara didn't press play yet. She left it there, like a knife placed in the center of a dinner table, forcing everyone to eat with trembling hands, wondering when it would be drawn. She drew a slow breath, locking her gaze on the oldest executive in the room. He immediately broke eye contact, as if that look alone could strip him bare. The silence stretched further, long enough to turn unease into fear. Then Amara spoke low, steady, cutting through the air like steel. You know why we're here, and you know, I heard everything. The room was crowded, but only one voice existed, and it didn't need to be loud to dominate. She tapped the screen, a soft beep. Then the room filled with a new sound, not present voices, but their own, captured when they thought no one was listening. Make the black woman uncomfortable enough to back out of the deal. The purser's voice rang out, clear and undeniable. Another voice followed deeper, one of the internal executives. Exactly. Don't let her think we're eager to sell. If she walks away, we keep the old terms. The room froze. No more airplane engines, no fake smiles, only the echo of their own words, floating like a verdict in the air. Amara didn't move, her face unreadable, but inside she heard her favorite symphony, the sound of power, swelling when the truth drags the arrogant into the light. The black woman, her mouth curved, almost imperceptibly. I wonder what you'll call me when I sign your termination papers. The purser stood rigid, his face drained of color. He opened his mouth, but his voice caught in his throat. The executive who had spoken leaned forward, his hands clamped together like a man trying to stop himself from trembling. Amara stopped the recording. No need for more. Those few sentences were enough to suffocate the room. Arms folded again, she leaned back, her gaze cut across them. "This isn't about a seat on a plane," she said, her voice steady, deliberate. "This is about how you thought you could handle me. And more importantly, this is proof that you tried." No one replied. She tilted her head, eyes locking on the executive. "But here's the thing," Amara continued, her words measured. "I'm not walking away from this deal. I'm buying it. And with just a few sentences, you sold yourselves cheap." A few younger attendants dropped their eyes, shoulders trembling. They hadn't spoken in the recording, but they knew when a ship sinks, the water doesn't spare anyone. Amara let the silence expand again. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to slam her fist. Her power lived in forcing them to face the truth with no exits left. She picked up the phone, spinning it lightly in her hand. "Now," she said, voice calm but heavy. "We're going to discuss who still deserves to be in this room when I sign that contract." The sentence wasn't loud, but every person understood this wasn't a discussion about business anymore. This was a discussion about survival. No one dared speak. No chair scraped. No cough interrupted the quiet. Just the hum of the air conditioning and the sound of hearts pounding like unsteady drums. Amara sat there, spine straight, fingers interlaced, not speaking, not needing to. This was the moment she knew better than anyone silence can be louder than any scream. She let it do the work, let it seep into their pores, into the cracks of their crumbling confidence. Let them replay their own words in their heads. A minute passed. It felt like an hour-long trial. The purser bowed his head lower, as if he could find safety on the floor. An executive dabbed his forehead with a tissue, hand trembling. The younger attendants huddled in the corner, barely breathing. None of them knew what was coming, but they all understood this wasn't a meeting. This was judgment. Amara's gaze crawled over each of them, slow, merciless. She didn't need questions to know who were the co-conspirators and who were merely silent witnesses. Their bodies had already confessed. "Interesting," she thought. "Yesterday, they thought they could decide my worth. Today, they sit here waiting for me to decide theirs." One executive tried to speak Ms. Lewis, but the look she gave him cut his words clean. He shut his mouth instantly. Amara leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You know what happens when I sign this contract," she said. Her voice was quiet, but each word dropped like a hammer. "And you also know how you just took yourselves off the board." No one responded. She let the pause linger. Waiting was its own punishment. Then she stood, slowly, deliberately. Her heels clicked against the floor, each step tightening the noose around their nerves. She turned her back to them, wordlessly signaling that the judgment was already written. In that moment, they all understood real power isn't in what's said. It's in making people wait, tremble, and see their own end before it's spoken. And Amara, she savored every second of it. Amara rose. The leather chair gave a faint squeak, but in this room, it sounded like a judge's gavel. Every head turned toward her, but none dared meet her gaze for long. She walked to the head of the table, placing both hands lightly on the cold wood, her eyes sweeping across the faces before her. She was no longer the humiliated passenger on a flight, no longer the out-of-place black woman in first class. Standing before them, Amara had become something they'd never prepared to face the owner of the game. Her voice was calm, each word falling like it was etched into the air. "You didn't just disrespect a customer, you betrayed your own company." One of the executives inhaled sharply, as if to protest, but held it back. The younger attendants pressed themselves against the wall, afraid to look up. The purser bowed his head even lower, as if the floor were his only refuge. I heard everything. Amara continued. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a plan, a scheme. Her voice wasn't loud, but each syllable had been honed to a blade. You thought I'd walk away? That a little push would make me abandon this deal? You were thinking too small. She walked slowly toward the far end of the table. Each strike of her heels echoed through the room. You forgot. She stopped, locking eyes with the internal director whose voice had been caught on the recording. That I am not a guest seeking luxury. I am the one about to buy the empire you work for. Silence. Amara turned back, standing at the center of the room, forcing every eye to meet her whether they wanted to or not. You betrayed this company when you let arrogance and prejudice lead you, and in doing so, you put yourselves in a very dangerous position standing before me. In that moment, the VIP room ceased to be a lounge. It became a courtroom, and Amara, with her unshakable composure, was judge, jury, and executioner. She didn't need to scream to deliver punishment. Everyone there understood when Amara was this calm. They should be most afraid. Arms folded, head high, she said. I won't repeat what I heard. I don't need to. Every one of you in this room knows your role in this charade, and every one of you will pay for it. She let the words hang. Because the greatest fear doesn't come from the sentence itself, it comes from not knowing when it will fall. Amara stood tall, hands clasped in front of her. Every eye clung to her as if searching for a lifeline. But Amara hadn't come to give them one. Entire crew of Flight 302 suspended, immediately. A sharp breath broke from the end of the table. The purser's head snapped up, mouth opening as if to object, but Amara's glance sliced through the air and shut him down before he could speak. He lowered his head again. Silent. She turned to the two executives, the director behind this scheme. She paused, letting her gaze settle on the man whose voice had been exposed in the recording, terminated, and investigated, and... The room went cold. The man swallowed hard, his face drained to the color of paper. Miss Lewis, it was just... Don't, Amara cut him off, her voice soft but absolute. Don't insult my intelligence by calling this just. You turned a flight into a weapon to pressure me, and you let racial bias dictate your policy. You didn't just fail me. You betrayed this entire company. He had no defense left. Amara walked back to the phone still lying in the center of the table, touching it lightly, as if to remind them the evidence wasn't going anywhere. She turned to face the room again. And this deal? She shrugged, her tone dropping as if it were small talk. On hold, we'll renegotiate. I won't pay full price for an empire whose employees disrespect their customers and themselves. One of the older executives stammered, Miss Lewis, you're damaging. Amara raised her hand, silencing him. No, I'm redefining its value. Silence. She walked toward the door, turning back only once. You thought you'd make me so uncomfortable I'd walk away. In truth, her lips curled into a faint smile. You just helped me buy it for much less. No one reacted, no one dared. Amara opened the door, and before stepping out, she added, without looking back, Prepare yourselves. When I return, some of you won't set foot in this room again. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving the room as a cage for those who had just been sentenced without knowing when their execution would come. A silence heavier than any scream. She walked slowly down the hall, unhurried, as if time now belonged to her, no more judgmental stares, no more smug laughter like on the plane. Only silence, the sharpest weapon she had wielded. The most beautiful power, Amara thought, is the kind that doesn't need to shout. Just a signature and those who once scorned you vanish. She stopped at another VIP suite, more private. Inside, the air smelled of dark wood and leather. Soft amber light fell on a large table where a bottle of red wine had already been opened. Amara poured herself a glass, moving slowly, as though savoring an ordinary evening, not as though she'd just wiped a chessboard clean. She sat, crossing one leg over the other, leaning back, one hand holding the glass, the other swiping her phone to send a short message to the legal team. Execute now. 2 words, enough to start a tidal wave that would wash away those who had tried to make her uncomfortable enough to walk away. She took a sip, the bitter edge of the wine coating her tongue, warming its way down her throat. Closing her eyes, she let the taste mix with the thought, silence isn't weakness. Silence is when you've already won a battle they don't know they've lost. Outside, they were no doubt scrambling, making calls, begging for lifelines. But it didn't matter. The game had ended the moment the recording played. Everything else was just useless flailing. Amara set the glass down, watching the ripples on its dark surface. Funny, she mused. Just one flight, and it exposed the people and the structures they thought were unshakable. She stood and moved to the window. The runway stretched out under bright white lights, planes lifting off into the night carrying passengers who had no idea that in a private room nearby, the fate of an airline had just been rewritten. Amara didn't laugh. She simply smiled, a small, knowing smile for herself, for the quiet victory that needed no applause. Victory isn't always in the cheers. Sometimes it's walking out of a room, taking a sip of wine, and knowing everything now belongs to you. And Amara, she had owned this sky long before they even realized it. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more powerful stories of empathy, justice, and silent strength to life. Your support is what fuels this journey. Let's keep standing together and rising higher, one story at a time. Stay safe and inspired.